Lady Catherine Ashworth pressed her gloved hand against the cold stone wall of St. Margaret's orphanage and tried to steady her breathing. The autumn wind whipped through the courtyard, sending brown leaves dancing around her dark blue skirts. She had come here with one purpose: to find a child who needed a home, to fill the empty nursery that had haunted her dreams for 7 years of marriage. What she did not know was that behind those weathered brick walls lived a boy whose very existence could destroy everything she held dear. "Your Grace, the children are ready to meet you," said Sister Mary Agnes, her keys jingling as she unlocked the heavy wooden door. The nun's face was kind but weathered, like someone who had seen too much sadness in her 40 years at the orphanage. Catherine nodded and followed the sister inside. The smell of boiled cabbage and lye soap filled her nose. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of children's voices echoing through the halls. Her heart raced with a mixture of hope and fear. She had tried everything else. The doctors in London had examined her month after month, year after year. They had given her tonics and treatments that left her sick and weak. They had told her husband, the Duke of Ashworth, that she might never bear children. The whispers at court grew louder each season. The pressure from his family grew stronger. "We have many wonderful children here," Sister Mary Agnes said as they walked down a long corridor lined with portraits of former benefactors. Ages 5 to 15, all of them bright and eager for a loving home. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirts. "I should like to meet them all, if that is possible." They entered a large room with tall windows that let in streams of dusty sunlight. About 20 children stood in neat rows, their faces scrubbed clean and their simple clothes pressed. The younger ones shifted nervously from foot to foot. The older ones stood straight and tried to look worthy of selection. But Catherine's eyes went immediately to a boy standing slightly apart from the others. He looked to be about 10 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and the most striking green eyes she had ever seen. Something about his face made her breath catch in her throat. There was a familiar set to his jaw, a particular way he held his head that reminded her of someone. "That boy there," she said quietly to Sister Mary Agnes. "The one with the green eyes. What is his name?" "Oh, that is Thomas," the nun replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He came to us as an infant. 11 years ago, left on our doorstep in the middle of a terrible storm. No note, no explanation, just a beautiful baby boy wrapped in fine linen." Catherine felt her heart skip. "Fine linen?" "Yes, Your Grace." The fabric was of excellent quality. Whoever left him wanted him to be found safely, but they also wanted to remain unknown. Sister Mary Agnes glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "Between you and me, I have always suspected he came from a noble family. There is something about his bearing, his manner of speaking. He is quick to learn and has natural grace." As if sensing their conversation, Thomas looked up and met Catherine's eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the boy gave her a small, polite bow. The gesture was so perfectly executed, so naturally aristocratic, that Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. "Thomas," she called softly, "would you come here, please?" The boy walked toward her with confident steps. The other children watched with curious eyes, some with obvious envy. Thomas stopped a respectful distance away and folded his hands behind his back. "Good afternoon, Your Grace," he said. His voice was clear and well-spoken, with none of the rough accent she might have expected from an orphan child. "Good afternoon, Thomas. I understand you have been here since you were very small." "Yes, Your Grace. The sisters have been very kind to me." Catherine studied his face more closely. Those green eyes were so familiar it made her chest tight. Tell me, what do you like to do with your time? I enjoy reading, Your Grace. Sister Mary Agnes has taught me Latin and French. I also like to work in the garden and help with the younger children. He paused, then added with a slight smile, and I am told I have a talent for riding, though we have no horses here. You have ridden before? Only once, Your Grace. A gentleman visited the orphanage last year and allowed some of us to sit on his horse. Sister Mary Agnes said I took to it like I was born in the saddle. Catherine's hands began to shake. She clasped them together to hide her reaction. And what is your greatest wish, Thomas? The boy considered this seriously. To have a family, Your Grace. Not just for myself, but so that I might have the chance to help others someday. To be someone who matters. The simple honesty of his answer broke something open in Catherine's chest. She looked at Sister Mary Agnes, who was watching the exchange with knowing eyes. I should like to speak with you privately, Sister, Catherine said. They moved to a small office while Thomas waited with the other children. Catherine's mind was racing with questions and doubts, but also with a growing certainty that this boy was meant to be hers. What can you tell me about the night he was brought here? She asked. Sister Mary Agnes closed the door and settled into her chair. It was November of 1805, the worst storm we had seen in years. Thunder and lightning, rain coming down so hard you could barely see across the courtyard. Someone pounded on our door near midnight. Did you see who it was? By the time I got there, they were gone. Only the baby remained, crying but healthy, wrapped in that fine linen I mentioned, and... The nun hesitated. And what? There was something else. A small gold ring tucked into his blankets, too fine for a child to wear, but clearly meant to stay with him. Catherine felt the room spin slightly. Do you still have this ring? Yes, Your Grace. I have kept it safe, hoping that someday it might help us learn who he is. Sister Mary Agnes opened a wooden box on her desk and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. When she unwrapped it, Catherine had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The ring was a signet ring, made of fine gold, with an intricate coat of arms carved into its surface. She knew that coat of arms. She had seen it 1,000 times on letters, on silver, on the very seal her husband used for his correspondence. It was the Ashworth family crest. Your Grace, are you quite well? Sister Mary Agnes asked with concern. You look very pale. Catherine forced herself to breathe normally. I am fine, just moved by the story. She looked at the ring again, hoping she had been mistaken. But there was no doubt. The 3 lions, the crown, the Latin motto beneath, Virtus et honor, virtue and honor. I should like to adopt Thomas, she said quietly. Your Grace, that is wonderful news. He is a good boy, and I believe he would thrive in a noble household. But Catherine was no longer thinking about giving a home to an orphan. She was thinking about her husband, Edmund Ashworth, the 5th Duke of Ashworth. She was thinking about where he had been 11 years ago, in the months before Thomas was born. She was thinking about the mysterious trips he had taken, the business he had claimed required his attention in the North Country. And she was thinking about the serving girl who had disappeared from their household around that same time. Mary, her name had been, a pretty young woman with dark hair and green eyes. I will need to discuss this with my husband, of course, Catherine said, struggling to keep her voice steady, but I believe we can provide Thomas with a good home. Of course, Your Grace, these decisions should not be made lightly. Catherine left the orphanage that afternoon with her mind in turmoil. She sat in her carriage as it rolled through the countryside toward Ashworth Manor, watching the familiar landscape pass by while her thoughts churned like storm clouds. Was it possible? Could Thomas be Edmund's son? The timing was right. The ring was undeniable evidence. And those eyes, now that she thought about it, they were exactly like Edmund's. How had she not seen it immediately? But if it was true, what did it mean? Edmund had never mentioned having a child. Had he known about the boy and chosen to abandon him? Or was he unaware that his brief liaison had resulted in a son? Catherine pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to ease the headache that was building behind her eyes. She had come to the orphanage, hoping to fill the empty space in her heart and her home. Instead, she might have stumbled upon a secret that could tear her world apart. By the time the carriage pulled up to the front steps of Ashworth Manor, she had made her decision. She would adopt Thomas, regardless of who his father might be. The boy deserved a home and a future, and if he was indeed Edmund's son, then he was entitled to much more than that. But she would not confront her husband. Not yet. First, she needed to be certain, and she needed to understand what kind of man she had really married. Edmund was waiting for her in the drawing room when she arrived. He stood by the fireplace, tall and elegant in his dark evening clothes, his green eyes warm with affection as she entered the room. "Catherine, my dear, how did your visit to the orphanage go?" She studied his face carefully as she removed her gloves. "Very well. I believe I have found a child who would suit our household." "Excellent. A girl, I hope? Someone who might be a companion for you?" "Actually a boy, about 10 years old. His name is Thomas." Edmund nodded approvingly. "A fine age. Old enough to be interesting company, young enough to adapt to our ways. What can you tell me about him?" Catherine watched her husband's expression closely. "He is bright and well-spoken. The sisters believe he comes from good breeding, though his origins are unknown. He was left at the orphanage as an infant. How unfortunate for him, but fortunate for us if he is to become part of our family." Edmund moved to pour himself a glass of brandy. "When might we expect to bring him home?" "I told Sister Mary Agnes I needed to discuss it with you first, but if you are agreeable, perhaps within the week." "Of course I am agreeable. You know how much I have wished to see you happy, Catherine. If this boy can bring you some measure of joy, then I welcome him gladly." The sincerity in Edmund's voice made Catherine's chest ache. Either her husband was an excellent actor, or he truly had no idea that he might be looking at the adoption of his own son. That night, Catherine lay awake, staring at the canopy above her bed. Edmund slept peacefully beside her, his breathing deep and regular. In the moonlight that filtered through the heavy curtains, she could see the familiar lines of his profile. The strong jaw, the straight nose, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. Just like Thomas. She slipped quietly from the bed and went to her writing desk. By candlelight, she composed a letter to Sister Mary Agnes, confirming her intention to adopt the boy and requesting that the paperwork be prepared as quickly as possible. Then she wrote another letter, this one to her friend Lady Margaret Thornton in London. Margaret had always been a reliable source of court gossip and society news. If there were rumors about Edmund's past indiscretions, Margaret would know about them. 3 days later, Catherine returned to the orphanage with a carriage full of new clothes and toys for Thomas. She found him in the garden, helping the younger children tend to a patch of vegetables. "Thomas," she called, "might I speak with you?" He left his work immediately and joined her beneath an old oak tree. His face was expectant, but guarded, as if he had learned not to hope too much for good news. "I have spoken with my husband," Catherine said gently. "We would very much like for you to come and live with us at Ashworth Manor." The boy's face lit up with such pure joy that Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Truly, Your Grace, truly, you would be our son in every way that matters." You would have tutors and proper schooling, your own room, your own horse to ride. And most importantly, you would have a family who loves you. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then his composure cracked, and he began to cry. Not the loud, dramatic tears of a child, but the quiet, overwhelming tears of someone who had carried too much hope for too long. Catherine knelt down and pulled him into her arms, holding him close while he wept against her shoulder. "It is all right," she whispered. "You are safe now. You are wanted." When his tears subsided, Thomas pulled back and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I am sorry, Your Grace. I did not mean to." "You have nothing to apologize for. These are happy tears, are they not?" "Yes, Your Grace. The happiest I have ever shed." Catherine smiled and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Then we shall have many more happy days ahead of us. Now shall we go inside and see about packing your things?" Thomas had very few possessions to pack. A few pieces of clothing, some books, and a small wooden horse that one of the older boys had carved for him. But he treated each item with careful reverence, as if they were priceless treasures. As they prepared to leave, Sister Mary Agnes pulled Catherine aside once more. "Your Grace, there is one more thing about that ring I showed you." "Yes? I have been thinking about it since your last visit. Thomas has the right to know about his origins, does he not? Perhaps when he is older, the ring might help him discover the truth about his family." Catherine felt her heart race. "What are you suggesting?" "Only that you should keep the ring safe for him. It is his by right, whatever his parentage might be." Catherine nodded and accepted the small wrapped object. The weight of it in her palm felt like the weight of the secret she now carried. The carriage ride to Ashworth Manor was filled with Thomas's excited chatter. He pressed his face to the window, marveling at the countryside, asking questions about everything he saw. Catherine answered as best she could, but her mind kept drifting to the ring in her reticule and the implications of what she was about to do. When they arrived at the manor, Edmund was waiting on the front steps. Catherine watched carefully as he got his first clear look at Thomas in the afternoon sunlight. For just a moment, she saw something flicker across her husband's face. Surprise, recognition, but it was gone so quickly she could not be sure. "Thomas," Edmund said warmly, extending his hand. "Welcome to your new home." The boy shook hands with perfect manners. "Thank you, Your Grace. I am honored to be here." "None of that formal nonsense," Edmund said with a laugh. "You may call me Father if you like, or Edmund if you prefer. We are family now." "Father," Thomas repeated, testing the word. A smile spread across his face. "I would like that very much." Edmund's expression softened. "Good. Now, let us show you to your room. I believe Catherine has had it prepared, especially for you." They spent the afternoon giving Thomas a tour of the manor. He was appropriately amazed by the library, the portrait gallery, and the grand staircase. But Catherine noticed that he moved through the house with surprising ease, as if he belonged there. That evening at dinner, Thomas charmed everyone with his polite conversation and genuine curiosity about his new surroundings. The servants clearly approved of him, and even the usually stern butler, Mr. Harrison, was seen to smile at the boy's questions about the proper way to ring for assistance. "You have done well, my dear," Edmund said to Catherine later that night as they prepared for bed. "Thomas is a remarkable young man. I believe he will fit into our family perfectly." "I am glad you approve," Catherine replied, brushing her hair at her dressing table. "I confess, I was nervous about your reaction. Why should I object to bringing joy into our home? The boy clearly adores you already, and I find him quite engaging myself." Edmund paused in the act of removing his cufflinks. "There is something familiar about him, though I cannot place what it might be." Catherine's hand stilled on her brush. Familiar? His manner, perhaps, or the way he carries himself. He has the bearing of nobility, despite his humble origins. The sisters at the orphanage mentioned the same thing. Edmund nodded thoughtfully. Well, no matter, what counts is that he is here now, and he is ours. Over the following weeks, Catherine watched with growing amazement as Thomas settled into life at Ashworth Manor. He took to his lessons with enthusiasm, mastering Latin verbs and mathematical equations with equal ease. His riding instructor declared him a natural horseman. The estate manager praised his quick understanding of agricultural matters, but it was the small, unconscious gestures that convinced Catherine she was right about his parentage. The way Thomas tilted his head when he was thinking, exactly as Edmund did. The particular way he held his teacup, his habit of running his hand through his hair when he was frustrated. Most telling of all was his natural affinity for the estate itself. He seemed to understand instinctively how things worked, where things belonged, what was expected in different situations. It was as if the knowledge was in his blood. Catherine began to love the boy with a fierce protectiveness that surprised her. Whether he was Edmund's son or not, Thomas had become precious to her. She delighted in his progress, worried about his happiness, and felt proud when others praised his accomplishments. But the secret knowledge burned inside her, like a slow flame. Every time Edmund smiled at Thomas, every time he ruffled the boy's hair, or praised his efforts, Catherine wondered if her husband suspected the truth. The answer came in a letter from Lady Margaret Thornton, delivered on a cold December morning while Thomas was at his lessons. "My dearest Catherine," the letter began, "you asked me to recall any gossip about Edmund from the years before your marriage. I confess I had to think carefully, as those days seem so long ago, but there was something, now that you mention it. In the autumn of 1804, there were whispers about Edmund and a serving girl in his household. The girl's name was Mary something or other. She was said to be quite beautiful, and there were rumors that Edmund had developed an attachment to her, nothing confirmed. You understand, but you know how servants talk. The girl disappeared rather suddenly in early 1805, and the rumors died with her departure. I always assumed she had found employment elsewhere, or perhaps married some local man. Edmund certainly never acknowledged any impropriety, and he was always discreet in his affairs. I hope this information is helpful for whatever purpose you require it. Do give my regards to your dear husband." Catherine set the letter down with trembling hands. Mary. The timeline fit perfectly, and if the girl had discovered she was with child, she went immediately to the estate office where the household records were kept. It took her nearly an hour to find what she was looking for, but there it was in the employment ledgers. Mary Whitman, scullery maid, employed June 1804, dismissed January 1805. Dismissed in January. Thomas had been left at the orphanage in November. If Mary had been with child when she was dismissed, she would have given birth sometime in the autumn. Catherine closed the ledger and sat back in her chair. She now had confirmation of what she had suspected. Thomas was Edmund's son, abandoned by a desperate young woman who had no other choice. But what should she do with this knowledge? That evening she watched Edmund and Thomas playing chess in the library. The boy was learning quickly, and Edmund was patient with his mistakes, offering gentle guidance and praise for good moves. "You have a fine strategic mind," Edmund was saying. "You think several moves ahead, which is the mark of an excellent player." "You taught me that," Thomas replied. "You said that in chess, as in life, one must always consider the consequences of each action." Edmund smiled. "Wise words, though I wonder where I learned them myself." Catherine felt her heart constrict. The affection between them was so natural, so genuine. Edmund clearly cared for Thomas deeply, even without knowing the truth, and Thomas worshipped his new father, hanging on every word, eager to please and learn. How could she destroy that bond with revelations about the past? But even as she told herself to leave things as they were, another part of her mind was spinning with the implications of what she knew. Thomas was not just Edmund's son, he was Edmund's heir. The current heir to the dukedom was Edmund's younger brother, Robert, a dissolute man who spent his time gambling and drinking in London. Robert had no children and seemed unlikely to produce any, given his lifestyle. After Robert, the title would pass to a distant cousin whose claim was weak at best. But if Thomas's parentage were acknowledged, he would be the rightful heir. He was the Duke's oldest son, even if born outside of marriage. With proper legal recognition, he could inherit everything. The thought kept Catherine awake for nights. She had grown to love Thomas as if he were her own child. The idea that he might someday be stripped of his inheritance because of the circumstances of his birth filled her with righteous anger. But she also knew that revealing the truth would create a scandal that could destroy all their lives. Edmund's reputation would be ruined. Thomas would be branded a bastard, and she herself would be seen as either a fool who had unknowingly adopted her husband's illegitimate child, or a schemer who had done so deliberately. The winter months passed in this state of internal turmoil. Catherine continued to be the perfect mother to Thomas and the perfect wife to Edmund, but inside she was torn between love and loyalty, between justice and self-preservation. The crisis came in early spring, when Edmund's brother Robert arrived unexpectedly at Ashworth Manor. Robert Ashworth was everything his older brother was not. Where Edmund was dignified, Robert was crude. Where Edmund was responsible, Robert was reckless. Where Edmund was kind, Robert was cruel. He had come, he announced, because he was deeply in debt and needed Edmund's financial assistance. Again. "Really, Edmund?" Robert said over dinner on his first night, gesturing with his wine glass and speaking too loudly. "You must stop rescuing every stray cat and orphan child. First you marry a barren woman, and now you adopt some beggar's brat. What will people say?" Catherine felt her face burn with humiliation, but Edmund's voice was ice-cold when he replied, "You will apologize to my wife immediately, Robert, and you will never speak of Thomas in such terms again." Robert laughed unpleasantly. "Oh, come now. Surely you can see the irony. The great Duke of Ashworth, reduced to playing father to someone else's bastard because his own wife cannot give him children." Thomas, who had been sitting quietly throughout this exchange, suddenly stood up from the table. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. "If you will excuse me, I believe I shall retire early this evening." He left the dining room with perfect dignity, but Catherine could see the hurt in his eyes. She rose to follow him, but Edmund was already on his feet. "Robert, you have gone too far. Thomas is my son in every way that matters, and I will not have him subjected to your venom." "Your son?" Robert sneered. "The boy is nothing to you, Edmund. Nothing but a reminder of your wife's failure to produce an heir. When you die, the title comes to me. All of this comes to me, and the first thing I shall do is throw that little pretender out on the street where he belongs." The words hit Catherine like physical blows. She could see the color drain from Edmund's face, could see his hands clench into fists at his sides. "Get out," Edmund said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my house, now, tonight." Robert's face turned red with anger. "You cannot throw me out. I am your brother. I am your heir. You are a disgrace to the family name, and if you ever threaten Thomas again, I will make sure you never see a penny of Ashworth money." "Empty threats, brother. You cannot change the entailment. When you die, Everything comes to me, whether you like it or not. After Robert had been forcibly removed from the premises by 2 footmen, Catherine found Edmund in his study, staring into the fire with a glass of brandy in his hand. "I am sorry you had to witness that," he said, without looking up. Catherine sat down across from him, her heart pounding. The moment had come. She could no longer keep the secret that burned inside her. "Edmund, there is something I must tell you about Thomas." He looked at her then, his green eyes weary. "What about him?" Catherine reached into her reticule and withdrew the small wrapped object she had carried with her for months. She placed it on the table between them and slowly unwrapped it. Edmund stared at the gold signet ring as if he was seeing a ghost. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "It was with Thomas when he was left at the orphanage, along with fine linen blankets and the hope that he would be found and cared for." Edmund's hand shook as he reached for the ring. It was his ring, the one that had gone missing years ago, the one he had thought lost forever. "This is impossible," he said. "I lost this ring in 1804. I searched everywhere for it." "Did you lose it, Edmund? Or did you give it to someone?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Catherine could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece, the crackling of the fire, the sound of her own heartbeat. Finally Edmund spoke. "Mary." "Yes." "You know about Mary. I know that she worked in our household. I know that she disappeared in early 1805, and I know that a baby with your eyes and your gestures and your ring was left at St. Margaret's orphanage 9 months later." Edmund set down his brandy glass and buried his face in his hands. "Dear God, what have I done?" Catherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "What happened, Edmund? Tell me the truth." When he looked up, his eyes were haunted. "I was young and foolish and lonely. You and I had been married less than 2 years, and already the pressure to produce an heir was overwhelming. The doctors kept telling us to be patient, but everyone around us whispered that something was wrong." He stood up and began to pace in front of the fireplace. "Mary was kind to me. She listened when I was frustrated. She never asked questions or made demands. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, you were having an affair." "Yes." "God help me, yes. For a few months I convinced myself that I was in love with her, that perhaps I had married the wrong woman, that perhaps she could give you the children I could not." Edmund stopped pacing and looked at her with anguish. "Catherine, you must believe me. I never meant for it to happen. And when I came to my senses, when I realized what I was doing to you, to our marriage, I ended it immediately and dismissed Mary from the household. Yes, I gave her money, references for another position. I hoped she would find happiness elsewhere." Catherine wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. "She was carrying your child, Edmund." "I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know. She never told me." Would it have mattered if she had? The question hung in the air between them. Edmund stared at the ring in his palm, turning it over and over. "I do not know," he said finally. "I was a different man then. Selfish, cowardly. I might have simply given her more money and sent her further away." Catherine felt a strange sense of relief. The secret was finally out. The truth was finally spoken between them. "But Thomas is here now," she said softly, "and he is your son." "Yes, I can see it now, so clearly I wonder how I missed it before. Those eyes, that bearing, he is mine. He is ours, Edmund. I love him as much as if I had given birth to him myself." Edmund looked at her with wonder. "How can you forgive me? How can you accept him, knowing what he represents? Because he is not responsible for the circumstances of his birth. Because he is a good, loving child who deserves a family. And because—" Catherine took a shaky breath. Because I love you, Edmund. All of you. Even the foolish young man who made mistakes 11 years ago. Edmund crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I do not deserve you, Catherine. I never have. We both made mistakes. I blamed you for something that was not your fault. I made you feel inadequate because I could not conceive. I drove you to seek comfort elsewhere. No, Edmund said firmly. My choices were my own. You did nothing wrong. They sat together in the firelight, holding hands and confronting the truth of their past. Finally, Catherine spoke the question that had been haunting her for months. What do we do now? Robert was right about one thing. The entailment laws are clear. Thomas cannot inherit unless his legitimacy is established. Edmund was quiet for a long time. There might be a way, he said eventually. If Mary and I had been married. But you were not. No, but if there were evidence that we had been, a marriage certificate, perhaps, witnesses who could swear they attended the ceremony. Catherine stared at her husband. Edmund, what are you suggesting? I am suggesting that Thomas is the rightful heir to the dukedom, and that sometimes, when the law fails to provide justice, good people must find other ways to ensure that justice is served. You are talking about forgery, fraud. I am talking about giving my son his birthright. Catherine felt her heart racing. The idea was dangerous, possibly criminal, but she thought about Thomas, sleeping peacefully upstairs, dreaming of his bright future. She thought about Robert's cruel words, his threat to throw the boy out into the street. She thought about all the love and joy Thomas had brought into their lives. It would have to be perfect, she said slowly. Beyond question. Edmund squeezed her hands. I know people in London who specialize in such things. Documents that would satisfy any legal inquiry. And if we are caught, then we face the consequences together. Catherine looked into her husband's eyes and saw the same fierce protectiveness she felt for Thomas. Whatever mistakes Edmund had made in the past, she could see that he loved their son completely now. Very well, she said, but we do this properly. Thomas must never know the truth about his origins unless we decide together that he should know. Agreed. They spent the next hour planning. Edmund would travel to London within the week, ostensibly on business. While there, he would arrange for the creation of documents, proving his marriage to Mary Whitman in a small parish church in the North Country. The marriage would have taken place in secret, before his official marriage to Catherine was arranged by their families. It was a complicated deception, requiring careful attention to dates and details, but Edmund was confident it could be done convincingly. There is one more thing, Catherine said, as they prepared to retire for the evening. We must tell Thomas something. He is too intelligent not to notice if you suddenly start treating him differently. What do you suggest? Catherine considered this. We tell him that we have discovered information about his parents, that his mother was a gentlewoman who worked in our household, and that circumstances forced her to give him up for adoption. We do not need to tell him about the deception, but we can tell him that he has Ashworth blood. And if he asks about his father, we say that his father was a good man who would have acknowledged him if circumstances had allowed. Edmund nodded slowly. It is close enough to the truth. They found Thomas the next morning in the library, reading a book about ancient Rome. He looked up when they entered, his face carefully composed but his eyes still showing traces of hurt from the previous evening. Thomas, Edmund said, settling into the chair beside him. Your mother and I have something important to discuss with you. The boy closed his book and gave them his full attention. We have learned some information about your birth parents, Catherine said gently. Information that changes your situation considerably. Thomas's eyes widened. You know who they were? We know who your mother was, Edmund replied, Her name was Mary Whitman. She was a gentlewoman who worked in our household many years ago. She worked here. Thomas looked around the library as if seeing it with new eyes. Yes, she was well educated and well bred, which explains your natural intelligence and grace. What happened to her? Catherine and Edmund exchanged glances. She died shortly after you were born, Catherine said softly. She arranged for you to be taken to the orphanage because she knew the sisters would care for you properly. And my father. Your father was also well born, Edmund said carefully. He would have acknowledged you if circumstances had allowed. But there were complications that made it impossible at the time. Thomas absorbed this information quietly. Am I legitimate? He asked finally. The question broke Catherine's heart. The boy was so young to be concerned with such matters, but Robert's cruel words the night before had clearly affected him deeply. Yes, Edmund said firmly. You are legitimate, and you are our son, in every way that matters. Does this mean I will inherit the estate someday? Edmund smiled. If that is what you wish, then yes. The lawyers will need to review some documents, but I believe your inheritance is secure. Thomas stared at them both for a long moment. Then his face broke into a radiant smile. I do not care about inheritance or titles, he said. I only care that I belong somewhere, that I am wanted. You are more than wanted, Catherine said, pulling him into her arms. You are loved, completely and forever. Edmund left for London 3 days later. While he was gone, Catherine worked to prepare Thomas for the changes that would come. She had long conversations with him about responsibility, about the duties that came with privilege, about the importance of using power wisely and kindly. Will people treat me differently when they know? Thomas asked one afternoon as they walked through the estate gardens. Some will, Catherine said honestly. There are people who care very much about titles and inheritance, but the people who truly matter will judge you by your character, not your parentage. Like you and father? Exactly like us. Thomas was quiet for a moment, picking up stones and skipping them across the pond. I am glad my real parents chose to bring me into your lives, he said finally, even if they could not keep me themselves. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. I am glad too, my darling boy. Edmund returned from London with a leather portfolio full of documents. He spread them out on his desk that evening and showed Catherine what he had obtained. The marriage certificate was beautifully crafted, aged to look appropriately old, and signed with perfect replicas of period signatures. There were supporting documents as well. A baptismal record for Thomas under the name Thomas Ashworth Whitman, witness statements from people who claimed to remember the secret ceremony, even hotel registrations showing Edmund's presence in the area at the appropriate time. It is remarkable work, Catherine said, examining the papers closely. I can see no flaws. Nor can I. The man who created these is an artist. Edmund gathered the documents carefully. I will present these to our solicitors next week. Within a month, Thomas's legitimacy should be legally established. And then Robert will have quite a surprise when he learns that he is no longer heir to the dukedom. Catherine smiled grimly. I confess, I look forward to seeing his reaction. The legal process moved more quickly than they had expected. The solicitors, presented with apparently authentic documents proving Edmund's first marriage, had no choice but to acknowledge Thomas as the legitimate heir to the dukedom. Robert received the news while he was in London, drowning his sorrows in various gambling hells and brothels. According to the reports that reached Ashworth Manor, he had flown into a rage, accused his brother of fraud, and threatened to contest the findings in court. But his threats came to nothing. The documents were too well crafted, the evidence too comprehensive. Within 6 months, Thomas's position as heir was legally secure. The boy himself handled the transformation with remarkable grace. He continued his studies with increased dedication, understanding now that he would someday be responsible for thousands of acres and hundreds of tenants. He spent time with the estate manager, learning about crops and livestock and tenant relations. He practiced his riding and his dancing and his French conversation, but he never lost the kindness and humility that had first attracted Catherine to him at the orphanage. If anything, his newfound status seemed to make him more conscious of his responsibility to help others. "I want to establish a school," he told Catherine one evening as they sat together in the drawing room, "for children like I was, children who have intelligence and potential but lack opportunity." "That is a wonderful idea," Catherine replied. "Your father and I would be happy to help you plan such a project. And I want to improve conditions at the orphanage where I lived. The sisters do their best, but they need better facilities, more resources." Of course, these are exactly the kinds of projects a future duke should undertake. As Thomas approached his 12th birthday, Catherine often marveled at how completely he had become their son. She loved him as fiercely as any mother could love a child, and watching Edmund with the boy filled her heart with joy. The guilt and regret that had shadowed her husband's eyes were gone, replaced by pride and deep affection. The three of them had become a true family, bound together by love and shared purpose, rather than just blood and law. But Catherine sometimes wondered if they were living on borrowed time. Would someone eventually question the documents? Would Robert find a way to expose their deception? Would Thomas himself someday learn the truth about his origins? The first test came when Thomas was 13, during a visit from Edmund's elderly aunt, Lady Pembroke. She was a sharp-eyed woman who had known the family for decades and prided herself on remembering every detail of family history. "So this is the famous Thomas," she said, studying the boy through her lorgnette as he performed a perfect bow. The secret son suddenly revealed. "Not so secret, Aunt," Edmund replied smoothly. "Simply private. Mary and I preferred to keep our early marriage out of society's gossip mill." "Indeed?" Lady Pembroke continued to examine Thomas with obvious skepticism. "And where did this marriage take place exactly?" "St. Bartholomew's Church in Millbrook," Edmund replied without hesitation. "A small ceremony witnessed by local residents. How romantic and convenient that all these documents should surface just when you needed an heir." Catherine felt her heart racing, but Edmund remained perfectly calm. The documents were always in Mary's possession. When she died, they were kept by the local vicar until Thomas came of age. "I see nothing convenient about losing 11 years with my son." Lady Pembroke sniffed disapprovingly, but seemed to accept the explanation. After she left, Catherine collapsed into a chair with relief. "She suspected something," she said. "Perhaps, but suspicion is not proof." And Thomas handled himself beautifully. Indeed, Thomas had been the picture of respectful attention throughout the visit, answering Lady Pembroke's questions with poise and intelligence. If the old woman had hoped to trip him up or expose some flaw in his story, she had been disappointed. As the years passed, such challenges became less frequent. Thomas grew into a handsome, capable young man who commanded respect wherever he went. At 15, he was tall and athletic, with his father's green eyes and his mother's gentle nature. His tutors praised his intelligence, his riding master admired his skill, and the estate workers appreciated his genuine interest in their welfare. Catherine could not have been prouder if she had given birth to him herself. But it was during Thomas's 16th year that the past finally caught up with them in an unexpected way. Catherine was working in her garden on a warm spring morning when one of the footmen approached with a message. "Your Grace, there is a woman at the kitchen door asking to speak with you." She says it concerns Master Thomas. Catherine felt a chill of foreboding. What sort of woman? An older woman, Your Grace, plainly dressed but respectable. She says her name is Sarah Whitman. The name hit Catherine like a physical blow. Whitman, Mary's surname. Show her to the morning room, Catherine said, struggling to keep her voice steady. I will see her immediately. The woman waiting for her was perhaps 50 years old, with greying hair and work-worn hands, but her eyes were kind, and there was something familiar about the shape of her face. Your Grace, the woman said, rising and curtsying awkwardly, thank you for agreeing to see me. I am Sarah Whitman. Please, sit down. How may I help you? Sarah twisted her hands nervously in her lap. I apologize for coming here unannounced, Your Grace, but I have traveled a long way, and I must speak with you about my niece. Catherine's mouth went dry. Your niece? Mary Whitman. She worked in this household many years ago. I see. And what about Mary brings you here today? Sarah looked around the elegant morning room as if gathering courage. Your Grace, I know about the boy, about Thomas. Catherine forced herself to remain calm. What about Thomas? He is Mary's son, my great-nephew. I have come to see him, if you will allow it. The room seemed to spin around Catherine. I am afraid I do not understand. Please, Your Grace, I know the truth. Mary came to me when she discovered she was with child. She stayed with me until the baby was born. I was with her when she died, 3 days after the birth. Catherine's hands began to shake. Mary is dead? Yes, Your Grace. She died of childbed fever, but before she died, she told me about the boy's father. She told me about the Duke. The secret was unraveling before Catherine's eyes. What do you want? She asked quietly. Only to see him, Your Grace. To know that he is well and happy. Mary made me promise to watch over him, if I could. It has taken me 16 years to find him, but I never stopped looking. Catherine studied the woman's face, seeing traces of Thomas in her features. How did you discover he was here? I have searched every orphanage in the county, Your Grace. When I learned that the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth had adopted a boy of the right age, I knew it had to be him, especially when I heard that his legitimacy had been established through marriage documents. And what do you intend to do with this knowledge? Sarah looked surprised by the question. Your Grace, I intend to do nothing except see my sister's grandchild and know that he is loved. You do not seek money, recognition. Heaven no, Your Grace. I am a simple woman. I have no desire to cause trouble for anyone. I only want to see that Mary's boy has found happiness. Catherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks. The woman's obvious sincerity and love for Thomas was overwhelming. He has found happiness, she said softly. He is loved more than you can imagine. I am so glad. Mary worried so much about what would become of him. She wanted to keep him, but she knew she could not provide for him properly. She hoped that someday he would find his way to a good family. He did. He found his way to us. They sat in silence for a moment, both women thinking about the young woman who had died so long ago, leaving behind only her love for a child she would never see grow up. Would you like to meet him? Catherine asked finally. Sarah's face lit up with joy. Oh, Your Grace. Could I? Of course, but I must ask you to be discreet about the circumstances of his birth. Thomas believes his parents were married. It is important that he continue to believe that. I understand completely, Your Grace. I would never do anything to hurt the boy. Catherine sent for Thomas, her heart pounding as she waited for him to arrive. When he entered the morning room, Sarah gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. Dear God, she whispered, he looks just like Mary did at his age. Thomas looked between the two women with curious eyes. "Mother, is everything all right?" "Thomas, I would like you to meet Mrs. Sarah Whitman. She was your birth mother's aunt." Thomas's eyes widened. "My mother's aunt?" He moved forward and bowed politely. "It is an honor to meet you, ma'am." Sarah stood up and curtsied, tears streaming down her face. "The honor is mine, young master. You are even more handsome than I dared hope." "Did you know my mother well?" Thomas asked, settling into a chair near Sarah. "Oh yes, I knew her from birth. She was my brother's daughter, and she lived with me for a time after her parents died. She was the sweetest, kindest girl you could imagine." "What was she like?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "She had your eyes, though hers were blue rather than green. And she had your gentle nature. She could never bear to see anyone or anything suffer. She once spent her entire week's wages to buy food for a family whose father had lost his job." Thomas listened with rapt attention as Sarah shared stories about Mary's childhood, her love of reading, her skill at needlework, her dream of someday having a family of her own. "She would be so proud of you," Sarah said finally, "so proud of the young man you have become." "I wish I could have known her," Thomas replied softly. "She lives on in you, my dear boy, in your kindness, your intelligence, your good heart." Catherine watched the interaction with mixed emotions. She was deeply moved by Sarah's obvious love for Thomas and by Thomas's eagerness to learn about his birth mother. But she was also terrified that this encounter might somehow expose their carefully constructed fiction. As if reading her thoughts, Sarah turned to Catherine with a knowing look. "Your Grace, I want you to know that Mary spoke often about the Duke's kindness to her. She never regretted the choices she made, and she was grateful for the love she experienced, however briefly." Catherine nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Sarah knew the truth about Thomas's parentage, but she would not expose it. "I am glad to hear that," Catherine replied. "Mary's memory is precious to all of us." Sarah spent the afternoon with them, sharing more stories about Mary and asking gentle questions about Thomas's life and education. When it came time for her to leave, she hugged Thomas tightly. "Promise me you will remember that you are loved," she said. "By your parents here, by the memory of your birth mother, and by an old woman who thinks you are the finest young man she has ever met." "I promise," Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. After Sarah had gone, Catherine found herself alone with Thomas in the garden. He was quiet, clearly processing the encounter. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes, I think so. It was wonderful to meet someone who knew my birth mother, but also sad, somehow." "In what way?" Thomas considered this. "It makes her loss feel more real, I suppose. Before today, she was just an idea, a story. Now she feels like a real person who lived and died and never got to see me grow up." Catherine's heart ached for him. "I am sorry, darling. I hope meeting Mrs. Whitman was not too painful." "No, not painful, just complicated." Thomas looked at her with mature eyes. "But I want you to know that learning about my birth mother does not change how I feel about you. You are my mother in every way that matters. You are the one who has loved me and raised me and made me who I am." Catherine pulled him into her arms, holding him close and fighting back tears. "And you are my son, my precious, beloved son." That evening, Catherine told Edmund about Sarah's visit. He listened with growing concern as she described the encounter. "How much does she know?" he asked. "Everything, I think. But she made it clear that she has no intention of causing trouble. She only wanted to see Thomas and know that he was well." "Can we trust her?" "I believe so. Her love for Thomas is genuine, and she understands that exposing the truth would only hurt him." Edmund nodded thoughtfully. "Still, her existence is a complication. If she were ever questioned by someone seeking to challenge Thomas's legitimacy, she would protect him. I am certain of it. I hope you are right. As it turned out, Catherine's faith in Sarah Whitman was well placed. The woman returned to her quiet life in the North Country and never spoke publicly about her visit to Ashworth Manor. But she did write occasional letters to Catherine, asking after Thomas's welfare and sharing news of their extended family. Thomas treasured these letters, and he began to correspond with Sarah directly, sharing news of his studies and his plans for the future. The connection to his birth family seemed to give him a sense of completeness that Catherine had not even realized he was missing. As Thomas approached his 18th birthday, Catherine began to think seriously about his future. He would soon need to take on more responsibilities as heir to the dukedom. He would need to consider marriage, the establishment of his own household, the continuation of the family line. The irony was not lost on her. The boy she had adopted to fill the emptiness in her childless home was now positioned to ensure the continuation of the very family line she had been unable to preserve. "Have you given any thought to marriage?" she asked Thomas one evening as they sat together in the library. Thomas looked up from the book he was reading, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "Some thought, yes. Anyone in particular?" "There is a young lady I met at the Thorntons' party last month. Lady Elizabeth Hartwell. She is intelligent and kind, and we seem to share many interests." Catherine smiled. "I remember Elizabeth, a lovely girl. Does she return your interest?" "I believe so. We have corresponded several times since the party." "And what does your father think of her?" "He approves. He says the Hartwell family is well regarded, and that Elizabeth would make an excellent Duchess someday." Catherine felt a pang of sadness. Her little boy was truly becoming a man, ready to take on the full responsibilities of his position. "There is no rush," she said gently. "You are still young. There is time to be certain of your feelings." "I know, but I find myself looking forward to having a family of my own, to raising children who will never doubt their place in the world." The comment was casual, but it hit Catherine like a blow. Despite all their love and care, despite his legal legitimacy and secure inheritance, Thomas still carried some deep uncertainty about his origins. That night, she lay awake thinking about the choices they had made and the secrets they had kept. Had they done right by Thomas? Had their deception truly protected him, or had it simply created a different kind of burden for him to carry? She was still wrestling with these questions when Edmund came to bed. "You seem troubled," he said, settling beside her. "I have been thinking about Thomas, about what we did." "Having regrets?" Catherine considered this. "Not regrets, exactly, but questions. Did we do the right thing, Edmund? All the lies, the forged documents, the elaborate deception." Edmund was quiet for a long moment. "I think we did what we thought was best at the time. Thomas has had a good life, a secure future. He is loved and respected and happy, but he still feels uncertain about his place in the world. I can see it in him sometimes, a shadow of doubt." "All children struggle with questions of identity and belonging, Catherine, even children born into traditional circumstances." "Perhaps, but sometimes I wonder if we should tell him the truth. All of it." Edmund turned to look at her in the darkness. "What would be the purpose? To ease our consciences, or to help him? I do not know. Maybe both. The truth would not change his legal status now. The documents are accepted, his inheritance is secure, but it might shatter his understanding of who he is and where he comes from." Catherine sighed. "You are probably right. It is just, I hate that our love for him began with deception." "Our love for him is not deception, Catherine. That is the most real thing in our lives." She knew he was right, but the weight of their secret still pressed on her heart. The answer came from an unexpected source: Thomas himself. It was a few days before his 18th birthday when he approached Catherine in her sitting room. His expression was serious, and he carried a letter in his hand. "Mother, I need to ask you something important." Catherine set down her needlework and gave him her full attention. "Of course, darling. What is it?" Thomas sat down across from her, the letter still clutched in his hands. "I received this today from Mrs. Whitman. She writes about my birth mother, about the circumstances of my birth." Catherine's heart began to race. "What does she say?" "She says that my birth mother loved my father very much, but that they could not be together openly because he was already married. She says that Mary understood the situation and never expected anything from him, but that she wanted me to know I was conceived in love, not just passion." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "Thomas, Mother, I need to know the truth. Is he my real father?" The moment Catherine had dreaded for years had finally arrived. She looked into Thomas's eyes, those familiar green eyes that were so much like Edmund's, and knew that she could not lie to him anymore. "Yes," she whispered. "He is." Thomas closed his eyes and let out a long breath. "I thought so. I have suspected for some time. Too many things fit together too perfectly. Are you angry with us for not telling you?" Thomas opened his eyes and looked at her with surprising calmness. "No, I understand why you did it. To protect me, to secure my future, to spare me the stigma of illegitimacy. We love you, Thomas, so much. Everything we did was because we love you. I know that. I have never doubted that." Thomas leaned forward and took her hands in his. "But I am glad to know the truth. It explains so much about how I fit into this family, why Father and I understand each other so well, why I feel so at home in this place." Catherine began to cry. "I was so afraid that if you knew, you would think less of us, of your father especially." "Think less of him, Mother? He made a mistake when he was young, but then he spent years trying to make it right. He gave me his name, his inheritance, his love. He made me his son in every way possible. How could I think less of him for that? And me? Do you think less of me for the deception?" Thomas smiled and squeezed her hands. "You took in a strange child and loved him as your own. You fought for his future and protected his interests, even when it meant keeping painful secrets. You are the most remarkable woman I know." Catherine pulled him into her arms, holding him close as she had when he was still small enough to fit in her lap. "I love you so much," she whispered. "I love you too, Mother, and I want you to know that nothing has changed. You are still my parents, this is still my home, and I am still proud to be your son." That evening, the three of them sat together in the library while Thomas shared what he had learned and how he felt about it. Edmund was initially concerned that the truth would damage their relationship, but Thomas quickly reassured him. "Father, you could have ignored my existence entirely. Instead, you made me your heir and gave me a future I never could have imagined. I am grateful, not resentful. But the circumstances of your birth, the way it happened, were not my doing or my responsibility. I am not ashamed of how I came into the world. I am only grateful that I found my way to parents who love me." Edmund's eyes filled with tears. "You are a better man than I deserve as a son." "No, Father, I am exactly the son you deserve, because you made me who I am." On Thomas's 18th birthday, they held a grand celebration at Ashworth Manor. Friends and family came from all across the county to honor the young heir to the dukedom. Thomas moved through the festivities with grace and confidence, accepting congratulations and well wishes with the perfect manners they had taught him. But Catherine's favourite moment came late in the evening, when the guests had gone home and the three of them sat together on the terrace, watching the stars come out. "This has been the happiest day of my life," Thomas said quietly. "Your birthday?" Catherine asked. "No, the day you chose me at the orphanage. Everything good in my life started from that moment." Catherine reached over and took his hand. "Everything good in our lives started from that moment too." Edmund raised his glass in a toast. "To family, not the family we are born into, but the family we choose to create." "To family," Catherine and Thomas echoed. As they sat together in the peaceful darkness, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with her desperate desire for a child, and had led through secrets and deceptions, revelations and reconciliations, to this place of perfect contentment. Thomas was no longer the uncertain orphan boy she had found at St. Margaret's. He was a confident young man, secure in his identity and his place in the world. He knew who he was and where he came from, and he had made peace with all of it. More importantly, he knew he was loved. Completely, unconditionally, forever. The following spring, Thomas announced his engagement to Lady Elizabeth Hartwell. The wedding was set for autumn, a grand affair that would unite two of the most respected families in England. Catherine threw herself into the wedding preparations with joy and enthusiasm. She had never had the opportunity to plan a wedding for a daughter, and Elizabeth quickly became like a daughter to her. "You must know," Elizabeth said to Catherine one afternoon, as they discussed flower arrangements, "that I love Thomas completely, not for his title or his fortune, but for the man he is." "I do know that," Catherine replied. "I can see it in the way you look at each other. He has told me about his origins, about how you and the Duke found him and made him your son. I think it shows remarkable character that you were able to love a child who was not born to you." Catherine smiled. "It was not difficult to love Thomas. It was the easiest thing I have ever done. I hope someday I will be half as good a mother as you have been to him." "You will be a wonderful mother, Elizabeth, and Thomas will be a wonderful father. I have no doubt of that." The wedding was indeed a grand affair, held at the cathedral in London, with all the pomp and ceremony befitting the heir to a dukedom. Thomas looked handsome and happy in his formal attire, and Elizabeth was radiant in her white silk gown. But for Catherine, the most meaningful moment came during the private family ceremony the night before, when Thomas and Elizabeth exchanged personal vows in the presence of only their closest relatives. "Elizabeth," Thomas said, his voice strong and clear, "I promise to love you with the same fierce devotion that my parents have shown to each other and to me. I have learned from their example that true love means choosing someone every day, supporting them through every challenge, and never giving up on the bond you have created together." When he finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. After the wedding, Thomas and Elizabeth settled into married life with the same grace they had shown during their courtship. They divided their time between London and a smaller estate that Edmund had given them as a wedding gift, but they visited Ashworth Manor frequently. Catherine delighted in watching them together, seeing the deep affection and respect they shared, and when Elizabeth announced, barely a year after their wedding, that she was expecting their first child, Catherine felt a joy so profound it took her breath away. "You are going to be a grandmother," Thomas said, grinning as he shared the news. "A grandmother," Catherine repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that. We want to name the baby after you, if it is a girl," Elizabeth added. "Catherine, for the woman who made our happiness possible." Catherine began to cry happy tears. "That would be the greatest honor of my life." The baby was indeed a girl, born on a bright spring morning after an easy labor. Catherine was one of the first to hold her granddaughter, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features. "She looks like her father," she said to Elizabeth. who was resting peacefully in bed. "Do you think so? I thought she might have my nose." Definitely Thomas's nose, and his stubborn chin. Thomas came to sit beside the bed, reaching out to stroke his daughter's cheek with one gentle finger. "She is perfect," he said softly. "Yes, she is," Catherine agreed. "Welcome to the world, little Catherine." As she looked at the 3 generations gathered in that room, herself, Thomas, and baby Catherine, she felt a deep sense of completion. The circle was complete. The family that had begun with a desperate woman's decision to adopt an orphan had grown into something beautiful and lasting. The years that followed were filled with joy and laughter. Little Catherine grew into a bright, spirited child who charmed everyone she met. She was followed by 2 brothers, Edmund and James, who completed the family. Catherine delighted in her role as grandmother, spoiling the children shamelessly and filling their days with stories and adventures. Thomas proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving, but also firm when necessary. Elizabeth managed the household with efficiency and grace, while also involving herself in charitable work throughout the county. On Catherine's 60th birthday, the entire family gathered at Ashworth Manor for a celebration. The house was full of children's laughter, adult conversation, and the warm sounds of a family at ease with itself. That evening, after the younger generation had gone to bed, Catherine sat with Edmund and Thomas on the same terrace where they had shared so many important conversations over the years. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly. "The choice you made to adopt me?" Catherine looked at her son, for he would always be her son, regardless of the circumstances of his birth, and shook her head firmly. "Never, not for a single moment. You have brought nothing but joy into my life. Even with all the complications, the secrets, the deceptions, the risks we took, especially because of those things, they proved how much we loved you, how far we were willing to go to protect you and give you the life you deserved." Edmund nodded in agreement. "You have exceeded our wildest hopes, Thomas. As a son, as a man, as a father, we could not be prouder of you." Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking out at the gardens where he had played as a child, where his own children now played. "I have been thinking about something," he said finally, "about the orphanage where I was born, St. Margaret's." "What about it?" Catherine asked. "I want to do something significant for them. Not just a donation, but something lasting. I have been working with architects to design a new building, with proper dormitories, classrooms, a library, even a small infirmary." Catherine felt her heart swell with pride. "That is a wonderful idea. I want to call it the Mary Whitman Memorial Building, to honor my birth mother, but also to honor all the women who have to make impossible choices about their children." Edmund reached over and clasped his son's shoulder. "She would be proud of you." "I hope so. I want every child who comes through those doors to know that their circumstances do not define their worth. That with love and opportunity, anyone can find their place in the world." Catherine wiped away tears of joy. "That is exactly what you have proven with your own life." The memorial building was completed 2 years later, a beautiful structure that provided modern facilities for the orphans of St. Margaret's. At the dedication ceremony, Thomas gave a speech that moved everyone present to tears. "I stand before you today as living proof that the love and care you provide to these children matters," he said. "Because of the kindness of the sisters at this institution, because of the chance I was given to find a family, I have been able to build a life of purpose and meaning. Every child here deserves the same opportunity." In the audience, Catherine sat with Edmund and their grandchildren, watching with immense pride as Thomas cut the ribbon on the new building. Beside them sat Sarah Whitman, now elderly but still sharp, beaming with joy at seeing her great-nephew grown into such a fine man. After the ceremony, Sarah approached Catherine and Edmund. "I want to thank you," she said simply, "for loving him, for raising him, for making him into the man he is today." "Thank you for bringing Mary's story into his life," Catherine replied. "It gave him the piece of his history he needed to feel complete." "We all did right by that boy," Sarah said with satisfaction. "Mary would be so proud." As Catherine watched Thomas showing his children around the new building, explaining to them the importance of helping others less fortunate, she reflected on the long journey that had brought them all to this moment. It had started with heartbreak, her inability to bear children, Edmund's infidelity, Mary's tragic death, but from that pain had grown something beautiful. A family bound together not by blood alone, but by choice, by love, by shared commitment to each other's happiness. Thomas had never known his birth mother, but he carried her legacy of kindness and sacrifice. He had been abandoned as an infant, but he had found parents who loved him unconditionally. He had been born outside of marriage, but he had grown up to become a man of unshakable integrity. The secrets and deceptions that had once seemed so dangerous now seemed like necessary steps in a larger plan. They had protected Thomas when he was vulnerable, preserved his inheritance when others would have denied it to him, and given him the security he needed to become the man he was meant to be. Most importantly, they had allowed love to triumph over the arbitrary rules of society and law. That evening, as the family gathered once more at Ashworth Manor, Catherine found herself in the nursery with her newest grandchild, a baby boy born just 2 months earlier. As she rocked him gently, she thought about the cycles of life, the way love passes from generation to generation, the way each new beginning carries echoes of all the beginnings that came before. Thomas appeared in the doorway, smiling at the sight of his mother with his son. "He looks peaceful with you," he said softly. "All babies are peaceful when they are loved," Catherine replied. "It is when they grow older that life becomes complicated." Thomas came to sit beside her, reaching out to touch his son's tiny hand. "Do you think we will face the same challenges with our children that you faced with me?" Catherine considered this. "Every generation faces its own challenges, but you and Elizabeth have something that will see you through any difficulty." "What is that?" "You know how to love completely without reservation, without conditions. You learned that from being loved that way yourselves." Thomas smiled. "I learned it from you and Father, and now you are teaching it to your children. That is how love continues, how families survive and thrive through generations." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the baby sleep. Outside, the sun was setting over the estate that would someday belong to this tiny boy, just as it had once belonged to his father, just as it had been secured for Thomas through love and determination and a willingness to fight for what was right. Catherine thought about the young woman she had been, desperate for a child to fill the emptiness in her heart. She could never have imagined then that her search for one child would lead to such abundance, not just Thomas, but Elizabeth, and now 3 grandchildren with surely more to come. The Barren Duchess had indeed adopted an orphan, not knowing the child was her husband's secret heir. But more than that, she had discovered that families are not just born, they are made, day by day, choice by choice, through the accumulation of love and loyalty and shared experience. And sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that begin with broken hearts learning to heal together. As the stars came out over Ashworth Manor, Catherine held her grandson close and whispered the same promise she had made to Thomas so many years ago. "You are loved, little one, completely and forever, and that love will be your greatest inheritance." In the end, that was the only truth that mattered. Not the circumstances of birth, not the complexities of law and inheritance, not the secrets that had once seemed so important. Just love, in all its forms, binding them together and carrying them forward into whatever the future might hold. The story that had begun with an abandoned baby and a desperate Duchess had become something far greater, a testament to the power of love to transform lives, create families, and build legacies that would endure for generations to come. And in the quiet nursery of Ashworth Manor, surrounded by the evidence of that love made manifest, Catherine knew that she had found everything she had ever been searching for, and more than she had ever dared to dream.